Hello once again, my friends. I'd like to welcome you to another video. And this is going to be a little bit of a history lesson. I got a ship to introduce you guys to today. Now, the one that is depicted right now, my model of the Titanic, was the closest thing that I could even think to attempt to even make a parallel, a remote parallel on the ship I'm going to introduce you to. The Titanic was built to be the most luxurious and most beautiful thing afloat, and she was at the time. What ended up happening was she struck an iceberg and she ended up sinking in 1912 on her maiden voyage. So the reason I'm bringing up that is because we're going to introduce the Great Eastern. We're going to be talking about the Great Iron Ship by James Dugan today. And this is the Great Eastern. And when I say a ship that just about everything possible could go wrong, this thing, it fit the bill. So many problems with this ship. So I'm going to show you guys, I'm going to introduce you to this ship through the eyes of Jim Dugan. And we're going to take a look, and you're going to understand why I kind of can relate to Titanic only because of the disaster. The Great Eastern, she did have problems with her funnel collapsing on a maiden voyage, and things happened, but well, we'll get into it. So let's take a look at the Great Iron Ship by James Dugan. So we got the Great Iron Ship by James Dugan. For the first time, the full and incredible saga of the Great Eastern, the mighty vessel built over a century ago that dwarfs all but the largest of today's ocean liners, the most spectacular phenomenon of her century. She laid the Atlantic cable, but sailed under a curse that killed or ruined hundreds of men. She was a pleasure palace and a floating graveyard, a laughingstock and a tragic heroine. And on the back, you can see this is the ship that killed her designer, drowned her first captain, logged 4 mutinies, killed 35 men, survived the Atlantic's weirdest storm, laid the Atlantic cable, sank 4 ships, made 6 knights, caused 13 lawsuits, was 6 times at auction, boarded by 2 million sightseers, and ended up a floating circus. You'll be astonished over and over at the incredible variety of the Great Eastern's adventures. With the story of one ship, but what a ship, James Dugan has launched a new and exciting kind of social history. So when we open up the book, I want to show you that this is actually the first printing, but we'll get to that. So let me put the light on. And it's got some information on the dust jacket. Incidentally, this is a Book of the Month Club selection. With 16 pages of illustrations, The Great Iron Ship by James Dugan. The Great Eastern, launched in 1858, was the largest iron ship ever built. She was a heroine and villainess of one of the most astounding sagas in maritime history. With a full length of 692 feet and a beam of 120 feet, she dwarfed all but the largest of today's ocean liners. She could not pass through today's modern Panama Canal, and she was also too deep for the Suez Canal of her time. She was designed to carry more passengers than the Queen Mary, and had paddle wheels and propellers bigger than an ocean have seen since, plus a vast expanse of canvas. She was a ship that accompanied the impossible by laying the Atlantic cable. Yet the Great Eastern, from her conception in the mind of her eccentric designer, was haunted by an incredible jinx that killed, maimed, or financially ruined hundreds of men. Her career was an unprecedented combination of high comedy and grim tragedy. The story of this monster steamship is a paranoia of the genius, charlatans, the crackpots, and celebrities of the last century. From the ill-fated I.K. Brunel, the greatest engineer of his day, to Louis Napoleon of France, who was thrown for heavy financial losses by the erratic vessel. For a partial list of some episodes in a great ship's career, see the back jacket, and I had shown you guys that. And this goes on to continue on the back. James Dugan has spent the best part of 10 years investigating the story of the Great Eastern, as well as 6 months of research in England. He was born in Altoona, Pennsylvania, and graduated from Pennsylvania State College. He assisted Captain J.Y. Cousteau and Frederick Dumas, the undersea explorers, in writing The Silent World, and that was a great film, and has worked with Captain Cousteau in the Calypso, marine archaeological expeditions, and in the Mediterranean. Material for the Great Iron Ship came to Mr. Dugan from a variety of sources, including a penguin egg hunter in the Falkland Islands, a retired Mersey tug captain, and institutions and people in France, Canada, Britain, and Ireland. His articles have also appeared in the Saturday Evening Post, Cosmopolitan, Reader's Digest, and other publications. A portion of the Great Iron Ship has recently appeared in the New Yorker. Mr. Dugan was a staff correspondent for Yank during the war and now lives with his wife in Westbury, Long Island. This book is a Harper find, selected by Harper's representatives in all parts of America on the basis of their own personal enthusiasm for a good story well told. Among notification finds of the past have been Home to India, Anything Can Happen, Thank You, Mr. President, and Hunter. So this is kind of like a Book of the Month club kind of a thing. And there's some things in here that relates to that, but I'll show that to you later. Some of the things I wanted to show you, well, let me show you the inside cover. And I wanted to show you guys that this was the first edition. This is from 1953, and this is of the catalog card number 537732. So when we take a look at the contents, you can see the acknowledgments, the wonders of the sea, the little giant, fastest vessel beyond compare, the coming monster, lionizing herself, the war excitement, rocked in a cradle, Captain Patton, the Great Eastern Rock, the Raffle, Elephant Spinning a Cobweb, Le Grand Oriental, the French Telegraph, the All Red Line, Showboat, the Last Days of Leviathan, and then the index. So it shows the illustrations, and it gives some information. These illustrations printed in a separate section will be found following page 112, and we'll get to those in a minute. The Great Eastern, ready for launching. Isambard Kingdom Brunel, creator of the great ship. A broadside launching from the riverbank. Daniel Gooch, director of the Great Ship Company. Scott Russell, Henry Wakefield, I.K. Brunel, and Lord Derby. The Great Eastern in the Thames. The Great Eastern arriving in New York Bay. The monster ship at dock in North River. Quayside view of the Great Eastern. The Grand Saloon. The Grand Saloon during a storm. Cartoons appearing in Harper's Weekly during the ship's first visit to New York. The Great Eastern taking a length of the Atlantic cable aboard. Lowering the mark buoy after the cable was lost in the mid-Atlantic. The Great Eastern under sail and steam. Jimmy Patton, who was born aboard the ship with his mother. Captain Walter Patton. Edward Renwick, who repaired the ship underwater. Captain John Vine Hall. Deck scene during night cable laying. Currier and Ives lithograph of the Great Eastern. Jules Verne aboard the ship. Captain Robert Halpin, who laid 26,000 miles of deep underwater cable. The engineer George Beckwith. Parsees and Hindus visit the ship in Bombay. Some of the 500,000 people who visited the ship in Liverpool. And the Great Eastern, a floating billboard on the Mersey. So then it goes into the acknowledgments. Obviously, I am not going to read the whole book to you. I just wanted to go through points of interest on the book itself. I am going to be doing a video on the history of the Great Eastern, and I will be referencing this book a great deal. So we're going to take a look at the photos. You can see the top one is the Great Eastern, ready for launching in 1857 at the Isle of Dogs. Man in a stovepipe hat is John Scott Russell, her builder. On the bottom, you can see the Little Giant. That would be Isambard Kingdom Brunel, creator of the Great Iron Ship, poses for a stereo photographer against the 60-pound lengths of the launching drum cables. And before he got into the shipping, he was famous for the railroads. Let me see, I'll make sure I get the top photograph. The broadside launching from the riverbank. The Little Giant stands on a high platform to supervise the first disastrous slide, October of 1857. And it would take several launch attempts to finally get her in the water. The bottom on the left is Daniel Gooch, locomotive engineer, for whom the ship made a great capitalist, if not a successful showman. And then we have a photograph of Scott Russell, apprentice Wakefield, I.K. Brunel, and Mr. Derby watching the great ship prepare for her maiden voyage. Brunel fell with a stroke a few hours later. You can see a nice picture of her, the Great Eastern in the Thames, during the 18 months it took to fit her out for her ocean adventure. And it's funny because this frame makes you think of handrails, but they're not, because look at the size of the person as opposed to the framing that's around the bow. Alright, so we got another photo on top. This is New York in 1860. The boy who saw the bay yesterday witnessed a spectacle that he will not be likely to forget if he should outlive Methuselah, said Gamecock Wilkes. Look at that. She was an amazing ship. The monster at the lumber wharf in the North River extends for 3 Greenwich Village blocks in the foreground, part of the carnival that sprang up around her. So not only did she have engines, she had the propellers in the back, she had the paddle wheels, and she had the smokestacks, and she had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, she had 6 masts. Now some of the masts also doubled as the emergency exhaust pipes, but it was still amazing to harness the power of the wind and machinery at the same time. The stage from the Western Hotel brings sightseers to the greatest ship at the foot of the Bank Street on a maiden visit in 1860. Beautiful. And look at the inside. This is the Grand Saloon, photographed in Quebec in 1861. The lady stands by the skylight well at the right, and the funnel casing covered with mirrors. Look at that. This is beautiful. I wish there were more detailed photographs of her. This one is the Grand Saloon sketched by passenger C.F. Hayward during the storm of September of 1861. Position of the chandeliers shows the violence of her roll. So the upper left, this is nobody knew his way around the great ship. Visitors or barefooted crew, there were 140,000 paid admissions in New York. The next sketch, the Great Eastern's officers were unpopular in New York. Old Adams beers were shown in a street fair near the ship. Visitors were permitted to stay aboard all day for $1. American sightseers covered the deck with tobacco juice, took everything loose as souvenirs, and played in the rigging. Look at this photograph. In the spring of 1865, the Great Eastern takes the length of the Atlantic cable aboard a Royal Navy bulk at Sheerness. Look at that. She's beautiful. Look at the size of that paddle wheel. Look at that. Lowering a mark buoy after the cable was lost in the mid-Atlantic. At the bow, pick up the wheel and grapple has been rigged for an attempt to recover the cable. It's just a massive ship. This is a beautiful picture. She's got her sails down. Here is a wonder of the waves under full power, paddle wheels, propeller, and sail. That's just a magnificent sight. Jimmy Patton, born aboard the Great Eastern in his mother's arms in 1863. Walter Patton, or Peyton, Master Mariner. He tamed the Great Eastern. Edward Renwick, the engineer who repaired the Great Eastern underwater, and Captain John Vile Hall, who had nervous breakdown after the maiden voyage. So this is Oxford Street, a port promenade deck of the Great Eastern during the night cable laying in 1866. Cablemen on watch at the cable through to the right. It's just an amazing photo, and look at this awesome picture. One of the 5 Currier and Ives lithographs of the great ship. She was one of the biggest popular print subjects of the century. I can relate. I can imagine. Look at that. She's gorgeous. Jules Verne takes his ease in a rocking chair aboard the Great Eastern on a French charter voyage of 1867. This is Captain Robert Halpin, the man who laid 26,000 miles of deep-water cable. And then this is engineer George Beckwith, who served on his ship from 1860 to 1886. You can see this photograph. Parsees and Hindus visit the whitewashed monster in Bombay, and Captain Halpin's dog, Harold, poses in the foreground. Look at all those people. A few of the 500,000 people who visited the Great Showboat in Liverpool in 1886. And this is what you saw from Liverpool in the summer of 1886. Like a giant billboard. So, I wanted to show you guys points of interest, but I want to show you also something. There are a couple of things that I found in the book. I had told you that on the cover it had said that it was like a book of the month kind of club thing. Well, I actually found this on the inside. The Great Iron Ship by James Dugan, I.K. Brunel, a report by Clifton Fadiman, reprinted in this book of the month club news. So this is pretty cool. This is not pertaining to the book, this is pertaining to the club talking about the book. If ever there was a subject fit for the hand of the biographer, the story of the Great Eastern, the unappeasable whale that ate men and gold, is surely it. James Dugan has made the entertaining, most of the monstrous but true episode of the high Victorian days, the age of iron and the mechanical engineer. He has written a failure story far more amusing than any success stories could be. And out of the 692 feet and 12,000 tons of iron, she has made a character almost human in its foibles and a superb talent for getting into trouble. Some of our older members will surely remember stories of the Great Eastern, for its passage left a wake of legend, and has not yet subsided 65 years after the great iron ship met her fate under the trip hammers of the junkyard in her day. She was launched in 1858. She was the largest steamship afloat, 5 times the size of the biggest vessel then existing. Her 22,500-ton displacement was not exceeded until almost 50 years after she began her accident-prone career. She was designed to carry 4,000 passengers and to make a 22,000-mile round trip to Ceylon without refueling. As of note, the Queen Mary, then the Queen Mary I at the time, housed only half of that. The technological explosion was planned and built in England by one of the most remarkable and eccentric engineering geniuses in history, the Little Giant, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, a little man with vast ideas. He lived to see the Great Eastern begin her prodigious life of mishap, but not long enough to witness her to the full flower of her career or tragic comic disaster. There was no doubt that she helped kill Brunel, and he was the only one of the casualties for which she was responsible. Had the Great Eastern been used for long-distance hauls instead of mere transatlantic crossings, had she been properly managed, there had not been a non-stop wrangle between her capitalists and her engineers. But perhaps none of this would have helped, for she carried a permanent stowaway, and his name was Jonah. As a matter of fact, one of the legends stated that Riveter had been sealed alive in one of her hull cells. Perhaps he was the Jinx. Now, what they're talking about was during the, remember, when they were building the boat at the shipyards, they built her in a dry dock, and she would be launched later. And there was no welding at the time, so they had to hold it, much like Titanic. There was no welding, so everything was held together with rivets. Well, the story goes that one of the workers had fallen into a small cavity between the ribs and when they had put the plate on. And because it was so noisy with all of the pounding, driving the rivets in, and just all the noise, that his screams went unheard. Can you imagine a more really horrible way to die than to be walled up, literally, and just left there until you died? Before the Great Eastern had made her first trip to New York, she had eaten up $5 million. Now remember, this is 1865, so this is really a lot back then. The first of the fortunes she regularly swallowed on every voyage. She had hardly steamed a few dozen miles when the forward funnel blew out. She passed through the hands of 3 groups of shareholders before she never even ever carried a paying passenger. Everything that could possibly happen to the ship happened to the Great Eastern. Tanks of fish oil deluged her engine deck. 2 horses died of a bad cold because she passed too close to an iceberg. On her 4th voyage, she got stuck in a Flushing Bay, in the western end of Long Island Sound, with a gash in her bottom that could have comfortably accommodated an ordinary-sized ship. Storm, mechanical failure, inefficient captains and crew. The Great Eastern had everything. She almost cut New York in two when she first docked. Into her story enter such figures as Cyrus Field, who made use of the Great Eastern to lay Atlantic cable. Louis Napoleon, who wrested the Leviathan just in time for the hands of Sultan of Turkey, who wanted to use her to house his harem. Jules Verne, Du Cailloux, Indian Nabobs, the war correspondent Scott Russell, and dozens of other figures in a bygone age. The whole story is told by Mr. Dugan, an unfailing apprehension of the high and low medium comedy involved in the Great Eastern's crazy career. And with a sharp eye for Victorian background and personalities, his book, of course, came kind of curio, a period piece, a quaint footnote to history, and no more. But a mightily entertaining book, and sometimes hilariously funny, from the moment Brunel conceives the idea of the Great Eastern to the pathetic troubles of her old age and her end in the junkyard. It took 2 years to break her up. She resisted, reason to the last. This is the Book of the Month Club, 345 Hudson Street, New York, New York. So I thought this is a really, really cool find. Just because, I mean, this is from, the book was released in the 50s. So this has got to be pretty old, and it's in great shape. So I was very happy to find that. And oh, by the way, I found something else that's of note, very interesting in this book on the last page. This is actually a news article that was tucked into the back, and this is dated April 11th of 2005. The headline is, "Laying cable across the Atlantic in the mid-1800s was a daunting task." You can see the photograph right there. In 1866, the Mammoth Great Eastern successfully laid a 7,000-ton cable 3 miles beneath the surface of the Atlantic, connecting England to Newfoundland, and she did that in just 14 days. Even today, it seems monumental undertakings, bordering on the impossible. The chances of laying a telegraph cable across the Atlantic seemed microscopic in 1858. Then the daring project began. For one thing, no ship was big enough to carry the whole cable. For another, if the cable broke, despite elaborate precautions, the chances of grappling back to the surface a mile or two beneath the surface seemed rather small. Physical, moral, and technological adventure plays out in the great transatlantic cable. Using photographs of the time and reenactors, cable plays the tale out succinctly but engagingly. The story even has a central hero from beginning to end. At just $30 Yankee million named Cyrus Field, who sought the worldly rewards of his adventure, but also considered it the duty of the well-off to do good deeds. Field had made his reputation by taking over a failed paper-producing company and making it a growing concern. He was the flush. He was paid all of the company's debts. Even though no law compelled him to do so, some might call it cynical, calculated, grandstanding, but the concept of Field's life indicates that he acted out of sincere principle. Still, it was fabulous tools for separating investors from the capital for his cable ventures. Needless to say, he was eventually successful. Since 1866, the United States and Europe have been connected by telegraph cable. It was incalculably together, no string other than the copper wire on land poles, but almost impossible for humans to cut. A telegraph line was the first electric boom, nullified space and time in a way nothing had before. In 1843, the government paid for a line between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. By the time Field's ship sailed in 1858, all kinds of businesses, military establishments, and government projects depended on the instantaneous communication. Even in World War II, it was not a telephone call families dreaded, but the Western Union biker list. It was in 1858. It still took 2 weeks for messages to cross the Atlantic. Cable details how the idyllic Fields risked his considerable fortune, and those many of his friends, and lost money as the unforeseen happened. In retrospect, seemed humiliatingly obvious. When it was all over, he was even wealthier than before. He confessed that his ignorance was a key factor in his success. Had he been fully comprehended in what his efforts required, he would have diverted his passions to elsewhere projects. Ultimately, Field depended on a vessel that could easily fill an American Experience documentary itself. It was the Great Eastern, a maritime behemoth of its day. It also called the Great Iron Ship. It could carry the cable by itself. The transatlantic cable also represented intimate cooperation between commercial enterprise and the government. A Navy lieutenant who independently shared Field's enthusiasm brokered his case, and the project began with a detachment of a couple of U.S. Navy ships. In truth, in July of 1858, they had little else to do. Field's success believes incredible difficulties he and his partners and employees had to overcome. Worst-case scenarios emerged from time to time. Of course, they were overcome or compensated for, but the film creates an immediate sense of how they created havoc for the hardworking Tencher adventurers. As one of the historians in the film notes, the project was never far from a catastrophe. So, the Great American Experience, I'll have to look that up and see if I can find that, but this is from the Oregonian on Monday, April 11, 2005. So I thought this was a pretty nice little find in the book. So we got that. We have the actual Book of the Month Club insert, and I'm going to be doing a history on this book, on this great ship, and I hope I give her some justice. When you just think of a cursed ship, man, every sense of the word, just not meant to be an entity at all, a total albatross. And I've looked for model kits of this ship and I can't find any anywhere. I don't know. What do you guys think? Should we do a scratch build of the Great Eastern? The ship with the paddle wheels, the funnels, propellers, and by the way, the sailing masts is just very unique ship. I can't think of any other ship that had all three units of propulsion, the paddle wheels, the propellers, the wind, the sails. But anyway, my friends, I want to introduce this book to you guys just to show you or introduce the ship to you. So I'm working on a video on the history of this ship, and that'll be coming out soon. So my friends, thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.